All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello. Welcome to the ALCTS webinar on copyright issues for digital collections. I'm Felicity Dykes, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Julie Carmen. Julie has been self-employed as a consultant focusing on archives and cataloging. She'll be soon starting a position as a cataloging and digital initiatives librarian in Washington State. In the past, she worked for a historical society and at the Center for Oil Shale Technology and Research at the Colorado School of Mines, where she was involved in seeking copyright-related permissions from authors. There are a few things to keep in mind for today's webinar. All attendees are muted. So if you wish, and we don't have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you can use the hashtag you see on the screen. We won't be monitoring that Twitter feed, so if you have questions for Julie, please type them into the question box on your screen, and Julie will answer them at the end of the presentation. Questions which we don't get to will be answered offline, and the answers will be sent to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within 2 days. And now, here's Julie. There'll be a slight delay as we switch speakers.
Hello, this is Julie Carmen. It is quite an honor to be here today to present to the American Library Association and its branch of the Association for Library Collections and Technical Services, or ALCTS. This is my first time in presenting such a webinar, and I hope that it's of benefit to many of you listening. I am not a copyright expert by any means. I am simply sharing some of my experience in the hope that others can relate and I can learn from you, and also that you'll come away today with maybe a new perspective or a new way of looking at growing digital initiatives. I find there's a picture of me there. I live in Lakewood, Colorado currently. And I have found that digitization is one of my favorite things to do in the library realm. And I am also a certified archivist. So I am experienced in preservation and cataloging, educational outreach, and I've researched grants and fundraising. And I just enjoy it so much. And as many of you have probably experienced in your careers, that we can be overwhelmed or pulled in so many directions. And with digital initiatives and copyright law, it can be overwhelming. And this is where I hope that my experience is helpful. I will take questions at the end of the presentation. So please write down your questions, and I will try and answer them to the best of my ability. And if I don't know, I will simply tell you I don't know. And it is true that I will be moving and working at Central Washington University starting in October, and I'm very excited about that. So, and I'll be working with digital initiatives again, which I look forward to doing. How this came about was that I've been looking for jobs, and I've been interviewing quite a few people, and I would talk about the non-exclusive royalty-free form, and it just so happened that many people seemed unfamiliar with the NERF. And so I thought this might be fun to really focus on it and see if others can establish their own non-exclusive royalty-free form as a tool to grow their digital collections. Now, the first thing I've noticed when working with our digital collections at Colorado School of Mines was that there was quite a holdup in the copyright process. There would be so many authors from the Oil Shell Symposia proceedings that I had to find. That was my first instruction, to make sure that the Colorado School of Mines Oil Shell Symposium proceedings were digitized. And in order to do that, I worked with the legal services and the director of the Center for Oil Shell Technology and Research, which is a co-star. And we met several times, and I was told, you need to go get copyright. You need to have the copyright signed over, because even though the campus is the copyright holder of the printed forms and the books of those proceedings, and in digital format, they are not copyright holders. So you need to, Julie, as part of your job, go and get the copyright permit, signed over to the campus. So then we can digitize those works and let them be freely accessible. Well, after a year and a half, we had, I don't even think we had a dozen authors that were willing to sign over their copyright of the presentations and articles that they had created from the Oil Shell Symposium proceedings at the School of Mines. So out of frustration, I didn't know what else to do. I started doing some research to figure out what other campuses were doing, and I did find out that there were a lot of universities and archives that were doing similar things and were getting frustrated by the time it took to get those permissions, or the copyright, I should say. So I found that calling Carrie Russell was about the best thing I could do. She's a specialist at ALA, and I have her information coming up. And Carrie mentioned about the non-exclusive royalty-free form, and she said, why don't you try going after just the permissions to digitize and explain to your legal services folks that that's what the best practices are currently. Now, this was back in 2011. And so I met with my boss, Dr. Boak, at CoStar, and we talked, and we said, okay, this seems doable. And this slide here specifically, I wanted to make a note of saying that some of your copyright holdup is just part of the process, that even if you contact somebody via a letter or phone, email, or in person, you may wait to get an actual, yes, please use my works, in hours, days, weeks, months, or years. And when a copyright holder was never located or had passed on and there were no heirs, I would treat them as an orphan works and would go with the orphan works policies that are current. So the NERF, the non-exclusive royalty-free form, we created that would reflect the mission of the Oil Shell Repository. The Colorado Oil Shell Repository had a mission, and that was to organize and make its information, the special collections within that repository, available and accessible for research. And they also matched the mission of the campus, which was to support the education of the students and faculty and staff that used the campus. So we created this form that would allow the copyright holder to keep their copyright, but they're just giving away the permission so that that institution, Colorado School of Mines, could share the works, the full text, to the world. They would make no money. It was royalty-free. But in that process, I wanted to tell you that that when they realized that, say these works were published in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, let's say that they realized that their stuff wasn't being read as much, and I'm going to do something really quick here. I'm going to open up my email to see if everything I wanted to see if that helps the sound, and then Eva, let me know if that helps you at all. Okay, sorry about that. So if that sounds better, I hope it does. It does say close your email. Okay, so I'm going to close my email. I apologize for this brief interruption here. And go back. Now hopefully my sound is better. So can someone tell me if my sound is okay? Because I don't know. It was sounding good when we were meeting earlier. I'm going to keep talking. So, but when I would tell authors, you know, your works are more apt to be read, they'll be exposed to the world, and it will possibly, more than likely, increase the citation of their works if they get it digitized. So here's Carrie's information. She has her own book. If you're not familiar with Carrie's book, it's The Complete Copyright and Everyday Guide for Librarians. I have a copy of it on my desk, and I use it quite often just to remind me of a few things. I've tried to learn not to be overwhelmed by the copyright law because, as we know, things change throughout the different years. It seems like there's always new additions or corrections or new ways of looking at copyright. And so I've tried to just stay very focused on my collections and how to get permissions signed so that the legal services were happy and that we were covered and that we had the writers and the authors were aware of what was going on with their works. So here's some copyright resources. I've got Carrie's phone number. This is the toll-free number to the ALA office, and then they'll transfer you in to talk to Carrie. If you look on this website, you have some of the staff shown on their website, and there is a picture of Carrie there, and it has her email address listed. So you can contact her if you have any questions. So see, there's her email address. And I can't tell you how happy I was that I could talk to her and ask her all these questions. And we came up with a solution, which was the non-exclusive royalty-free form. Here's some other resources: the ACRL Copyright Committee, the Copyright Advisory Network, and the Copyright Advisory Network.net forum. And there's also a link on orphan works that I entered in there too, and those links all work as of today. The other thing that helped me very much was this book, Copyright and Cultural Institutions, Guidelines for Digitization for U.S. Libraries, Archives, and Museums by Hurdle, Hudson, and Kenyon. I really delightfully like this. I really like this book. Here's another link to it if you're interested in ever purchasing it for yourself. Hey, what did I just do that? Okay. The reason I like this book is that there are some sample licenses on page 141. And then the tip that I appreciated the most that I was able to show to my legal advisors was that on page 58 it says, any co-owner of a copyright can grant non-exclusive permission for the reproduction, distribution, or performance of a work. It is not necessary to secure the permission of all of the co-owners. So I'll take you back to my first process. Was here I had something like 26 years worth of Oil Shell Symposium proceedings that I needed to find every author. I was told every author for every panel presentation or article that was submitted into these journals needed to be contacted, and if they were alive, I needed to get them to sign over their copyright. Well, that was a little more that was needed, you know, that I tried to do, but it was just overwhelming. There was thousands of people. And so when I realized that I could go and get one co-owner of the copyright to grant that non-exclusive permission, then I would create a NERF for that person, and I would do a search through my spreadsheet of every article. I had created a spreadsheet of every article, and on an Excel spreadsheet, the title, the author's names, I put the symposium that they presented in, the date, all that information, and I'll show you more as we go along. And then we do a word search for that name, and I would find that person's name and create a NERF for them, and I would list all of the articles they were involved in, and that actually helped save me time. So I will break down the NERF that Colorado School of Mines created, and it's used with permission from the authors, who are listed here. Esther Henry is Associate Counsel with Legal Services at Colorado School of Mines. Then they would hire Charlene Croak, who's a partner with Dorsey and Whitney in Denver, for her copyright specialty. She's a copyright law person, I think. The best way to describe her is she specializes in copyright. So she would come in and we would have maybe a phone conference meeting with her when we had specific questions. And then Dr. Boak with CoStar of Colorado School of Mines. And I really felt like they put together an elegantly written, very clear to understand NERF. And I was looking on the website to other universities and organizations to find their non-exclusive royalty-free form. And I found some that were very simple. Maybe they were called a license, but it just wasn't as clearly written as what the School of Mines folks did. So I'm really grateful to them for giving us this permission. And this is part of your handout too, is this 4-page NERF that you can create your own from. And you can use the same format if you wish, or you can change it up. But it's the written language that they took and made this tool they created to match the mission of the campus, the mission of the library, the mission of the repository. It's all kind of folded in there, and they used it as a tool through the Center for Oil Shale Technology and Research. So it's a little bit convoluted, but it just goes to show you how easy this form is to create and make it your own. And that is what I love about this form. If you look on page 1, we took several meetings to create this, and there were several forms as it grew and morphed into the one that we ended up with. So if you look at the top, it says non-exclusive, royalty-free, worldwide license for oil shale publications. So it's specific to the collection. So the oil shale publications, that's why we created this specific NERF, but it doesn't mean that each department couldn't create their own NERF for their own collections and be more specific of what they're collecting. And I typed up this part in the very front where you'll see where it starts out, and I don't know if you can read it on the slide as well, but I put it in here because I like the way it read, where it says this agreement grants a non-exclusive, royalty-free, perpetual, worldwide license to the Colorado School of Mines to place a copy of your copyrighted works listed above on CSM's digital repository. This publication in digitized form is a way for your works to be used and cited more often. If the articles were commissioned by another person or organization or were written as part of the duties of an employee, an authorized representative of the commissioning organization or employer should sign. And then it gives you more directions. See page 4 for explanation of conditions. And so when you see the authors and the document title, that little table, if you will, at the top, if a person had several works that I wanted to digitize, then I would simply copy and paste and make that even a whole sheet of nothing but those 2 lines that say author's document title and repeat, repeat, repeat. Of every article, every presentation, every panel, poster, whatever we had in those symposia proceedings that person could actually sign for. And it also it has the contact for Jerry Boak. In case they have any questions about the form, they can call him and ask him. And at the bottom, if you'll notice on the bottom where it says CSM cannot publish your manuscript without receipt of this form, it's very clear saying, you know, we have to have this signed form. Okay, here's the second page. And it says here, this is for the certification of U.S. government work. And here the first box is for the first government person that you're actually sending it to. And then they can, we would ask them to please go and have their other U.S. government employees that worked with them on that article or presentation to also sign. And I like the way it's set up. I like the fact they have the signature, the date, the name typed or printed, a title if not the author, the institution name, the street address, the city, the state, the zip code, and the country. Because this is an international conference. So that was, I thought, brilliant that they had that all available for them. And then page 3, I guess, this is page 3. is the acceptance part, where Jerry Boak, Dr. Boak, would sign saying, yes, I have accepted this, these permissions for the digital project for CoStar, and he would put in his information, sign and date it, and then he would give it to me, and I would be the person to pull that article, mark it on my due diligence sheet, and make sure it had been digitized and it was good to go, and then we would create the metadata and have it ingested. Now, so in this page, this is where you would put the authority person's information in here and have them accept the permissions. And then the last page is an explanation of the conditions, where it says, this is the information concerning your copyright agreement. And I broke down the first paragraph in case you couldn't read it so well on the slide. So I typed it out in big letters here. And I like how it just really explains, you know, this is the copyright laws that are required from the School of Mines. And they want to obtain the specific rights to these articles published. And it also gives the authors their own copyright. You know, they still keep their copyright. But I like on the third section there where it says, have granted CSM the non-exclusive perpetual ability to create a copy of the full work and to publish such work in School of Mines digital repository and libraries, and to make such work available for use by those with access to the repository and libraries. And then they go further and they talk about, and this is also going to carry over to other types of media in the future, because you know what, we don't know what is going to happen to our information and technology in the future. It could change again, and then we all have to go after the permissions again for a different media. Well, this form is saying no. It's saying that we are making these licenses to make them available for public use to the library systems via other media. So it's talking about as technology changes. I love that part. So again, if you can use that in your areas, that would be great. So I should probably add in here that after we created the NERF and I started contacting authors and calling them and talking to them, and you know, it came that about 2 years of using the NERF, we got something like over 800 permissions of individuals, you know, pieces of information that had never been digitized before. And we got them from, you know, attendees of the Oil Shale Symposium proceedings that were government workers, that were not government workers, that worked for major corporations, that worked from other countries. We got permissions from other publishing companies, independent publishing companies, authors themselves, heirs of the authors, all kinds of permissions. And I just can't tell you how much utilizing the NERF made my job. We actually grew our digital collections, and we went out and did what we were meant to do, which was to make the oil shale information available for researchers. And that felt great, and I will tell you how I was able to manage that information so that I didn't go a little bit nuts. The legal services are there to protect the campus from risk. So their initiative is to make sure that anything that the library is doing is within the law so that the campus is protected. And so being able to work with them and to understand that they had so many other bigger projects to do, and that the waiting time that it took was not because they didn't care, but it was because they're so busy. And so I got very good at contacting the attorney's, the legal services office manager, and making sure that I scheduled through her, so that anytime I needed to contact Esther, I always copied her assistant. And that way I knew that if Esther was super busy or out of town or doing other stuff, that somebody else got that message and that they would get back to me if Esther was not going to be available. And I just had to be persistent, and I had to remind myself, oh, I'm so busy with these other projects, but oh, wait a minute, I haven't talked to Esther, and we haven't figured out if this one phrase is how we're going to put our NERF, or if our NERF is ready to go. Did she approve it? I mean, I had to be the one to make sure that we had all of our plans in place, because it was our digital initiative, and I was kind of in charge of it. So I had to make sure that I was being the one that was communicating well, and that seemed to be very helpful also. Here's some more copyright resources. I do love the listservs. I am a member of the ALCTS forum, which I'm sure many of you are, and if you're not, I have the ALCTS forum link there. But I just joined this copyright listserv in the hopes that it will also be a good informative avenue for me to ask questions or to help others when they're struggling with their digital repositories. I also signed up for a massive online open access class, a MOOC, about copyright through Duke University this summer. Because we were right in the middle of selling a house, I didn't get to take that class. But it's there, and I think they're going to teach it again. It was the Copyright for Educators and Librarians course team, and I was impressed with how it was put together and what they were teaching. And so, you know what, I'm going to take it again when they offer it once I get settled in Washington State. And of course, Creative Commons. I love Creative Commons. I think they have some good information about licensing as well. One of the things that is very important that the legal services on campus were very clear about is that they needed to see due diligence. They needed to know that I was spending a certain amount of time contacting authors, and I had to track that. And so I created the Excel spreadsheet, as I mentioned before, and I gave each series or related materials, like themed materials or collections, their own page. So in that page, I would write down in the first column where it came from. So let's say there were 26 years worth of oil shale symposium proceedings. So I would have first OSSP for oil shale symposium proceeding, and that would be in the first column. And then I would have the title of the article. I would have the author or authors' names, the date it was published, and then I would put copyright holder, and that way I could put yes or no, and permissions granted, yes or no. And then I put down at least 4 columns of contacts for me to enter dates. And sometimes it would be 6 contacts, or maybe, I would only use one of those columns because the first contact worked. You just never know. And that's how I managed and tracked the people that I talked to, the people that I was of most interest of their works. Those were the people I wanted to make sure I'd contacted, I'd shown my due diligence. And yes, the legal services asked for me to show them this, and I could send them my worksheets, and they were very satisfied with that documentation. Okay, so search process for copyright holders. Now, a lot of people think this could be very mind-numbing, or it takes up too much time, and they have other things they need to do, more important things in their job than to look up copyright holders. But I will tell you that in my varied job, I would make sure that I spent at least a minimum of 4 hours a week either looking up copyright holders or following up again to make sure that I could get those digital permissions. And then once I got them, I would pull them and make sure they were digital and ready to go. So I did an inventory of the collections, and I think we all do this when we start a job. We go in and we say, what is in our special collections? How important is it? How can it help the researchers in this area of study? And then I would recognize the relationships with the special collections that met the mission of the institution. And I would recognize those relationships. And then I would do the due diligence, track the contacts, and I would search on white pages or yellow pages online, believe it or not. That's what I did. I believe that there are other databases out there through business libraries, and I've not used those yet, but there are probably those of you that are wicked smart about that and could do that. Now, I also took specialists, such as Dr. Bogue, who is like, a world-renowned oil shale specialist, and I had him come into the repository, and I'd say, tell me what you think would be really helpful, that would be digitized, that you don't see now, that you see in this room, and I will try and go after the copyright holders. And he pulled out a box of these magazines called Shell Country. And he says, you know, I've always been fascinated by these magazines. I think they have a lot of good information. So I started reading those forms, and sure enough, I found that they had just a plethora of history of the oil shale industry, the state of Colorado, and the Nation oil shale industry. It was wonderful. And so I took those aside, and I looked at the publication here as Mountain Empire Publishing. I don't know if you can see that. But I looked at that company, and yes, it was defunct. It had closed. It was no more. So then I started looking at these names over here, these editors and managing editors and publisher. Now, this is one of the oldest, one of the most recent ones. This was like maybe even the last one they published was in 1983. But in the earlier editions, Alice Novak was like vice president or something. Well, here she is at the top. But I had went through 3 or 4 names and found that they were deceased, deceased, deceased. But I looked up Alice Novak, and I thought, well, that's an interesting way to spell Alice. I bet I could find her, and so I looked her up on the white pages, and an old address from Lakewood or Littleton, Colorado popped up, and there was a phone number, and I called that phone number, and she answered. Now, I don't know if that's just being lucky or what, but I was thrilled. So it took a little bit of time for me to go through these names, look up the, maybe I spent a half an hour. When I talked to Ms. Novak, I told her what, who I was and what I was up to and how impressed we were with the Shell Country magazines and how we'd be delighted. No one else had digitized it. That was the other thing I did in my search, is I made sure that no one else had digitized this magazine. So when I called her, I said, are you aware of anyone digitizing these issues? And she said, no, but we would love to have them digitized. So I created the NERF specific for her, and I listed every issue of every magazine that they published for Shell Country, and I emailed it to her. She printed it out. I just asked her to print out the last page with her signature on it and to mail me the original, and then I printed out that long list, the rest of the NERF at my office, and stapled her signature on it, but she also had an electronic copy of that same thing. That way she didn't have to print out all of those papers and then mail them to me. I saved her that expense. But that's how we did that. So now you can go to the Tell Ertl Oil Shell repository, which I'll pull up here, and you still have to, in order to, here's the things that we've come up with, but I could just go in here and put Shell Country, and I'll show you what it looks like. We had work-study students digitize all of these magazines. I did quality check, but here they are. And so you can click on these and get the full text PDF of every one of these issues. And I was quite happy with that, as was my boss. I've noticed, though, about white pages and yellow pages that because as we get more recent, people are less likely to share their information with those pages, so you will get connected to Instant Checkmate or People Finders or something like that, and you can pay them money to give you contact information, but you may not, you won't know until you find, do your own research to see if that's even current or correct. So I find it interesting that now maybe those hard copy phone books are maybe we should be keeping them, because if you go online, it's going to cost you money to find stuff. That's just one of those things I've noticed. Independent publishing companies. I always just look online to see, usually they're not quiet about who they are. They have a website. They're on Facebook sometimes. They're all over the social media. So these independent publishing companies want you to find them. And so that's usually very easy to find unless they've been closed. And if they have been closed, then look for the next best thing. Anyone that worked as an officer in that publishing company, or like an editor or publisher, and get there, try to look up them individually and try to find just somebody connected with that publishing company just to see who might be around still that is a copyright holder. And here again, you've got business library somewhere local that you can use their databases for business research. You can also try that if you're not lucky finding it just doing a simple search engine search. And I also would contact, if you know, okay, this company was doing business in this town, this city, maybe their local public libraries have some of those past phone books and you can find an old phone number and it may or may not still be working. But those are those little steps that even though it sounds so mundane and it sounds like, oh, it's a waste of time, it's such a hard thing to do, or gee, there's a better way to do it, or maybe I'll just have a student do it, it's still really interesting how just making that phone call and trying those phone numbers out led me to so many successes getting permissions. This Authors Coalition of America, LLC, I understand is also another place you can look for authors, especially more recent authors. Locating copyright heirs. Now, there was a gentleman, Paul L. Russell, that wrote 2 very special books in the oil shale business. And when I talk about oil shale, I'm not really talking about the fracking oil shale. I'm talking about the oil shale that's retorted, which means it's heated. And so that's a special technology, engineering type of approach to getting the oil out of the rock. So this gentleman wrote 2 books. And he wrote The History of Western Oil Shale, which he published under an independent publishing company, the Center for Professional Advancement. And the other one he wrote was Oil Shales of the World. And that one is totally in his copyright. And the last time I saw it online, it was like over $4,000. It's so rare. They didn't publish enough of them. Anyone that has a copy holds on to it. So I went to find his relatives. I looked him up, found out that, yes, I knew that he was deceased because the oil shellers that I was working with in research knew Mr. Russell and knew when he passed away. So when I looked him up and I found him in a Denver address, there was his daughter's name listed and a phone number. Again, I called that phone number. She answered, and I was able to talk to her about what we were doing. Now here is this individual that doesn't really understand publications or digital initiatives, and she knew that her father was very distrustful of the internet when he passed away. He had said, I don't want my work being accessed on the internet. I'm afraid people will steal my work. So I talked to her about copyright law and how that was illegal, and there are things to put in order for that not to happen, and you know, your father's work will be read more and it will be cited more. Don't you want him to have credit? Well, she still hedged. So she eventually said, well, it's really not my decision. I'll let my brother make that decision. And she finally gave me his email address. And I emailed him, and I never got a response. And so 3 months later, I followed up with her again saying, this is the email address you gave me. I'm not hearing anything from him. Can I just verify? And I spelled it out to her, and she had given it to me wrong. She gave me the correct email address. I emailed him, and that day he called me, and he granted us permission to digitize this one book that he had inherited the copyright. His sister didn't want to get involved, but he did, and he definitely gave us permission. So there again, we were able to digitize this very rare book and give it to the world, as well as the history of Western Oil Shale. The Center for Professional Advancement, they were one of them that responded within 3 hours or 4 hours and gave me permission to digitize. Growing your digital collections, I also like to make sure things have been digitized already, because if they have and they're a trusted resource, I can just link their digital copy to my catalog record, my mark tag, say 856, for example. So it's usually government websites are really trusted unless they're going through a major format, like they did a couple of years ago. Other university libraries and archives, museums, and those institutions that we are aware of that have the funding to support their digital resources. And then, so some of them I've listed here: Library of Congress, OCLC, HathiTrust, Internet Archive, Rocky Mountain Online Archive, and other university special collections. That's just to name a few. Okay, so I think I've got this wrapped up. I think that's all I can think of. Make sure that, you know, public domain is right now 1923. Public domain, if you've got anything that's you want to digitize and it was published before 1923, there's a good chance you can digitize it. If you're not sure, contact ALA just to find out. And like I said, these are just what practices I did and I found that were very helpful. And I'm hopeful that I have some questions from you all. I am ready to take questions now if there are any.
Thank you, Julie. Yes, if you have questions, just type them into the question box. But I'll get it started. Julie, on your form, do people have to sign it and mail it to you, or do you have an online version? I guess I'm also curious, how about a click-through form so people can just fill it out online? So how do you get the form?
They have not established that at School of Mines as yet. I think that as, especially with data curation and the mandates from the National Science Foundation and the Institute for Health, that would be a brilliant idea. But currently, I just asked Dr. Boak recently if they might be able to put their full text form online so people could download it at any time. And so he was going to look into that. And then, of course, Esther Henry emailed me and said, oh, please give those NERFs out as handouts. That's fine. But currently, as I'm not aware of them having it so interactive that you can just fill the form out online. I like that idea. I don't know if that's what they'll do. I no longer work at School of Mines, but I think it's a great idea for anyone to do that. And Legal Services did ask, we want, that we had the actual original signature. So even though they could sign it and digitize it and send it back to me, I would keep that digital copy, but I would make sure that I also had the original. The only time I couldn't get original was when some of our authors were from China, and they just couldn't digitize, they could only digitize it and send it to us. But for some reason, they didn't want to send it in the mail, or they couldn't. I'm not sure what the reasoning was. But that was an example of, okay, we've got the digital copy here. If anybody has a complaint, they can contact us, and we'll just take the digital item off if there's anybody that has a complaint.
Okay, so you obtained about 800. So did you contact people? Was that all by phone calls and the white pages, or did you have other ways of tracking down people?
I tracked down people. Well, first of all, Dr. Boak had his own spreadsheet of contact information from several years of managing the Oil Shale Symposium. So I had that contact information that I could utilize. And when I couldn't find somebody, but I knew that I had this list of, I created these spreadsheets again of all the authors of every presentation and poster given to these Oil Shale Symposia. And so if I couldn't track one of the authors down, I'd look to see who else was there, and if I had their contact information, I knew they were still around, I could email them and say, I can't find so-and-so. Do you have their contact information? The majority of my contacts were via either phone or email. And some of them would be like with the corporation. For example, the Saucony Mobile Project, I found, going through my collections, I found annual, quarterly, and monthly reports based on the Saucony Mobile Project that was funded by the Department of Interior. And it just so happened that School of Mines was like, not the project manager, but kind of the oversight reporting person, secretary, so to speak. They made sure that the processes that they were doing were the right processes as all these different corporations were doing the research. So I found all these documents that had never been digitized. They'd only been handed out in binder format to all the participating members of this program. And this was at Amble Points in Rifle, Colorado. And I was ecstatic. And I figured out, okay, ExxonMobil is the copyright holder. I contacted my contact in ExxonMobil and said, are you guys the copyright holders? Yes, we are. We have copyright to those materials. Can you please come over sometime when you're meeting with CoStar and look at these materials and give me permission to digitize them? Yes. So I took all of these binders and all these reports, and I just spread them out over 5 tables, and this woman came over, looked them over, and she signed that day a NERF that I already had prepared, the entire NERF of every item she looked at. She understood what the program was. She said, this is all old stuff. We don't care. Everybody knows about this. it's great to have it digitized, though. We could sure use that. She signed over that permission that day, and I was able to start putting those up on our repository. And that was probably 300 items right there.
Great. Can you explain approaches for establishing permission for post-1922 U.S. materials? I suppose most of what you've been talking about is post-1922.
Yes, because most of the materials I've been looking for are between 1960s and 1980s, 1990s. So that's what I'm doing now is things that are not in public domain. So that's why we have to go to this length of making sure that the copyright holder gets to keep their copyright, but they're giving us permission to share their full text items with the world. And when they understand that and they sign it over, then the institution's protected. They're pretty much protected within the copyright law that says, okay, you have permission to share this, and you've even got permission to share it in the future when technology changes. I hope I've answered that question.
Right, okay. What copyright permissions does a college or university need to digitize and publish a work done by a student?
Well, you know, normally, and I'm just going with what I understand about theses and dissertations, is that they have another license. So you should have, the university would have its license, as I understand it, so when a student fills out their format and they want to go, and this is where scholarly publication really comes into play. Most libraries that I understand that are doing their own publishing or getting permissions from the students is that they have this form in hand and they tell the students, you know, even if you have an opportunity to get published by a major publisher, and it doesn't necessarily cost you any money, and you might make a little money from it. Normally you don't make any money, and those publishing companies then own the copyright, and you are not allowed to share your work with anyone else because you've signed over your copyright to these other publishing companies. So you could use that as an opportunity to tell them about open access publishing and how that works. Sometimes it costs them money up front, but in the long end they get to be read by more people, cited more often if it's free for the world. And so universities can create their own too. If they're not doing it yet, then I would suggest they create a license for any student that they are wanting them to publish their information open access, that they would have this form in hand. And the non-exclusive royalty-free form just makes it really great, because then, you know, you've got the student has their copyright and they can share it with someone else. But it's already been digitized and the world can see it now through your library digital repository.
Okay. Okay, so for United States material post-1922, is that all public domain, do you know, or is there a method for figuring out what's public domain or not?
My understanding, and again, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is the magic date is 1923. So anything published before 1923 is considered public domain. So if you had items that were published in the United States in the 1910, 1911 time period, my understanding is you could just have it all digitized and put it up on your digital repository. But if you're not sure, if there's anything that you consider proprietary or sensitive, then you might want to check in with, you know, somebody like Carrie Russell, just to make sure. I mean, that's what I would do.
Okay.
Anything, and then I don't understand why it's still 1923. When I was a college student, when I was in grad school in 2005, 2006, 2007, that was the magic number then, and I'm thinking that's not fair. Why isn't the magic number for public domain now 1930? You know, I just think that they should give us new dates every few years so that we can get more stuff shared. That's my own personal opinion.
Alrighty. Would unpublished works like letters, diaries be treated differently than published items?
Yes and no, because again, you have to say, well, what's considered sensitive, right? So if you get a diary that's full of gossip and vengeance and nastiness may not be something, especially if some of those people are alive today, you might not want to digitize that. But if you get a diary, like I was able to accession and rehouse some Civil War diaries from the University of Colorado's Special Collections. And these soldiers, these, I don't remember if they were South or Union, but they wrote about what they prayed for that day and where they went and what they ate. And so absolutely I would digitize something like that. That's wonderful, wonderful things for writers to write about.
Well, are there different copyright issues or different issues about getting permission for that type of material?
I wouldn't think so. I would say that if it's from the Civil War era, you pretty much could put it up there. But let's say that there's generations of family in your historical community, and this was their great-great-grandpa or somebody like that. You might want to say, hey, is it okay? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now, again, that's my personal opinion. But if you get a diary that was written in 1950, I would never it's of course it's not in public domain for one thing, but you've got some of their relatives could be still living today and may not want that information out there. I think it's common sense to know what is sensitive, how old is it, and if you're just not sure, call somebody, put it out on the listserv. Say, I've got this collection from maybe it was financial records from a corporation or a company that started in 1920. Gee, should I digitize how they did their business in this area? And my guess would be everybody would say, sure, if we can learn about how to write about businesses being done in this area, at this location, at this time period.
Now, I suspect you'd still have to get permission from the copyright holder.
If it's 1920,
well,
maybe.
The 1950 example you have.
Oh, but the 1950, absolutely. And again, when you're looking at scrapbooks and people that have cut out articles and created their own collection within that scrapbook, those things are fascinating to digitize and share with the world if they're in public domain. And if they're given to you and you have the people's name and contact that gave that collection to you, you could find out, are you the copyright holder? If you are, do we have your permission? And do a NERF, and you'd be covered.
Okay. I'm going to read this question here. Have you leveraged termination rights clause in the U.S. copyright law to encourage authors to reclaim their rights after 35 years?
Oh, that's beyond me. I mean, I don't write that kind of law. I know that they're definitely in there, but what we're doing with the NERF that I've done so far with the NERF is that I've just said, this is basically, you're giving us permission to use this work and to put it into different media formats in the future so that the world can share it. That's all I've ever done. So that's a little bit above my experience.
Okay. Can you talk about how you figure out who an heir is when you know someone is deceased?
Mm-hmm. You want me to find? Oh, how did I figure that out? Is that the question?
Yeah, in general, how do you go about figuring out who is the copyright holder when someone's deceased?
It just happens to be that I looked at where the publication was published, so that I knew the town and the state. Now I looked up the author's name. And if there was an author's name that popped up that looked like it, sometimes they have the age right there, and so you can kind of say, yeah, he's probably that old. And then the yellow pages or the white pages, they do this. They say related to, and they'll list other people's names. And so I would just click on those names, and if there was a phone number, I'd call them, and I'd say, are you related to this person? He published this and this year. And they would tell me yes or no. And one of the people I really wanted to talk to so badly was a gentleman that had done some major oil shale research in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and he happened to be doing work in near Reno, Nevada. So I found a museum in that area, and I called them, and yes, they were familiar with this gentleman, and they thought maybe his family still might be there, and I called those people, and left them voice messages and nobody got back to me. Then I wrote to those people and they never responded. So I had to let go of it. But you can just, if you know that where the publication was published, then you can start looking at local museums, local social, historical societies, or go into those white pages, and they'll sometimes pull up that person and they'll say related people next to them. Now, that's the best thing I can do, but there's also the genealogy, the historical societies, the newspapers. They can also give you lots of information about people and their relatives.
Okay. Okay. Now, in your copyright research, do you ever consult the records from the U.S. Copyright Office?
Not so much. I mean, you can. I think there's a Copyright Clearance Center. And when I called them to ask how it worked to use them, they were the ones that actually went over. They would go after the permissions for you and charge you a fee. So I said, well, what if a librarian wanted to just call you and ask you for the contact information for an author? And that's the one when they suggested this author, American Authors LLC. They said that's where they would go to try to find an author. So, yeah.
Okay.
Did I answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we only have time for one more question. Let me ask a question about the orphan works. So at what point after you've done your due diligence do you declare something an orphan work?
Well, again, I'm not an expert, but if I cannot find anybody that's related to that article or publication or collection piece, that scrapbook, whatever, if I can't figure out who in the world it belonged to, or if they're deceased and there's no heirs, then I consider that an orphan work. I mean, there's nobody that's claiming it. It's an orphan. And that's when I would say, okay, it's time to treat it as an orphan work, and then I would go to the policies on the resources, the books, the websites, the specialists, and ask them, okay, what's the best way for me to treat this orphan work?
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Julie. That was a lot of useful information.
Oh, I hope so. I hope that people get to grow their digital collections, because every time that someone's growing their digital collection, it's just going to help me grow mine.
Great, thank you. So for all of our attendees, you will soon receive a short online evaluation form. So the Continuing Education Committee would really appreciate your taking the time to respond to the questions and to return that form to us. So we use that to improve webinars and your ideas for additional webinars. So right now we're just at the beginning of our fall 2014 webinar series. We have several more scheduled. So these are the ones coming up, but we are adding more to our schedule all the time. So the email address, the website address is there, and you can check there for more information about these and for other ones that will be added. And again, please put ideas on your evaluation form. So in addition to webinars, we also have e-forums, which are 2 or 3 day email chats on different topics. And you can sign up for that here. That's one thing Julie just mentioned, the valuable information she's gotten. And we have web courses. So these last 4 to 6 weeks with an instructor, and so they're more detailed training courses on these topics. Cataloging is coming soon, but the other ones are currently scheduled throughout the year. Thank you to Eva Sorrell for providing technical support for today's webinar. So the support provided by the Technical Support Subcommittee makes it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, and we hope you'll participate in other ALCTS continuing education offerings in the future.